Alrighty, it's time to discuss the other game I got with my PS5. I really enjoyed Insomniac's first Spider-Man game as well as Miles Morales, although I'll admit I don't think about them often nowadays. It's funny that I say Miles Morales has a very strong ending in my original review, but I honestly couldn't tell you what happened at the end now. So I didn't really follow the marketing or general reception to this sequel. All I really knew was Tony Todd would be voicing Venom, which, having seen Candyman, was really all I needed to be sold on this, and I knew when I eventually got a PS5 I'd definitely play it. So now that I have, what did I think? Well, as per usual, let's begin with the story, and I have to say right from the beginning, I could tell there were different writers behind this game. Something about the dialogue felt off, it's a bit forced at times, and the plot as a whole was a lot less interesting compared to the previous entries. The idea of all the reformed villains being hunted by a mysterious group is fun, and I still do like these characters, but it does feel like it jumps around a lot, and the non-superhero drama, often the most compelling parts of a Spider-Man tale, largely lacks conflict here. That's partly because of how basically everyone close to Peter and Miles knows of their web-slinging antics, and thus there's little tension in balancing the two lives, but also everyone's just kind of nice to each other. Not that that's bad, but there's a lot of things Harry does when he gets involved in the Spider-Man action which could lead to good drama, but Peter brushes it off and accepts it with no issue. I did find myself a lot more engaged when the Venom suit comes into play, but that's quite a way into the story, so on the whole, I was rather let down by the narrative. But just as before, it is presented very well with the usual great voice acting and stunning visuals. This is kind of a stupid point, but I love how tangible the fabric on the Spidey suits is, and the lighting on New York at all the different times of day is so striking. And even putting the visual wonder of it aside, New York is actually an interesting open world for a change. There's a greater diversity in location than just skyscrapers and Central Park, and there's a lot more side content from extra missions, random crimes, and taking pictures of the city in all its facets, which makes New York a character in and of itself. Many of my favourite moments here were when it felt like I was experiencing the simple, everyday life of being Spider-Man. It no longer feels like the open world is there just as a playground to swing around in, although of course that remains a total blast. It did take a moment to get used to it taking an extra second for the web to be produced, but I quickly adapted and it's still as thrilling as it's always been. You have a wing glider to use as well, which is mainly useful for crossing the river and is also good fun to use. The glider is probably the biggest new addition to the gameplay, because when you get to the fighting itself, it's pretty much business as before. This time you alternate between playing as Peter and Miles, both of whom have their own satisfying special attacks and gadgets to use in combat, as well as a webline that can be used in the stealth encounters. There's also a parry move which took me a bit to get good at using, but was pretty satisfying when I did. I do find myself using the air attack most of the time, which perhaps speaks to a lack of interesting depth, but the combat has always been fun in these games and this is no exception. Same goes for the stealth encounters. Whenever I'd get caught early in an attempt, I'd restart the checkpoint just so I could try and take everyone down as sneakily as possible. It's such a thrill to whittle down the numbers and maneuver the enemies into exactly the right place to take them down without being detected. My only issue with the stealth is the noticeable lack of it. The first time I encountered a stealth level was in one of the side missions a couple hours in. Up to that point I've been wondering where the hell they were. Outside of the Peter or Miles exploring an area, solving a puzzle, or these weird sidetrack ones, most of the missions are comprised of hand-to-hand combat, and as fun as the fighting is, man did I get tired of it. I started noticing most fight encounters have an initial first wave, then a second where other enemies like the robot dogs and big guys enter the battle, and it gets so repetitive. The variety isn't particularly well balanced, and where a lot of these missions can go on for quite a long time, parts of the game dragged on for me. So yeah, between the underwhelming story and overuse of hand-to-hand encounters, I was pretty disappointed with this game, and it is easily my least favourite of Insomniac's Spider-Man offerings, and certainly not worth the standard full price of 69 quid? I mean, thank God for second-hand stores, jeez. But even with all that said, the high points are very high. There's enough I really enjoyed to call this a fairly solid game overall, and I'll happily continue to partake in all the side content New York has to offer. It's just a shame about much of the main campaign.